What up, kinfolk? Welcome back to my channel. Today I decided to do a video that has been requested in the past, and I thought, I'm gonna start doing more sit-down videos, and what better way to start it than to start from the beginning and tell you guys my testimony, tell you guys how I came to know the Lord. So if you're interested in knowing my story, then keep on watching. Where do I begin? Let's start from the beginning. I grew up in probably an unconventional Christian home. My mother loves the Lord and has a super solid relationship with him, always has. But my father, he believes in God, but he didn't know the Lord at the time. I really love my mom's approach to God growing up because, you see so many times kids grow up in these Christian homes and their parents force them to go to church every Sunday. They have to go to Sunday school, and then they have to go to, church on Wednesday, and then they have to go to church like 3 times a week, and they get burnt out. So by the time they are able to make their own decisions, they don't want anything to do with the Lord, and then they go, everybody goes through their little, phase where they rebel. My mom never forced us to go to church. There were only a few times where she made us get up and go to church. At one point, she went to a church that I did not like it. I didn't. I thought the people were weird. I thought like I had a couple of friends there, but I just never felt like I fit. So I never really enjoyed it. I know my dad hated it. We actually talked about it a little bit recently. They were just different. And I never liked that place. But then there was a period where she worked at a church. And at this time, I was best friends with these girls who lived a couple houses over, and they went there. So my mom got the job. I think it was through them. And I had a lot of fun there. One, because I was really close with these girls, and their mom taught the Sunday school, and their mom was freaking awesome. And we had so much fun. So I really enjoyed that time. Other than that, we didn't really have a church home. Those were the only times that we really consistently went to church. I gave my life to the Lord. I don't remember when it was. I believe that it was probably like before I started school. I never went to preschool, but I would stay at home with my mom while Jason, my brother, was at school. He was in kindergarten. And I remember when my mom sat me on the bed and asked me if I wanted to give my life over to Christ. And I said yes. So she led me in the salvation prayer, and I repeated it, and I accepted the Lord at a very, very, very young age. But it wasn't until way later that I truly, obviously I was like, I was 4 or 5, so I didn't really understand. But I knew that I wanted it. I wanted to be just like my mommy. And my mom is the most amazing woman ever and has a heart of gold. So of course I wanted to be like my mom. So I accepted the Lord that day, but I didn't get baptized at that point. My mom wanted us to be at an age where we understood what we were doing and make the decision ourselves to get baptized. So fast forward, 6th grade was the year that I found out that my parents were going to get a divorce, and I found out they were separated, and that's when everything changed for me. Before I found out my parents were getting divorced, I was all about my grades. I cared so much about school, and everything had to be perfect. I would come home right after school, do my homework. I just had to get good grades. I just wanted my parents to be proud. Everything had to be great. And then after I found out that they were getting divorced, because we were so blindsided by it, I think I was in shock. I remember I had to see the guidance counselor because I was so devastated. After that, I don't know, I was more careless. So I started hanging out with a different crowd of people. I started to care more about things that didn't matter, really. I just wanted to get my mind off of what was going on at home, because the years after we found out they were separated, which was half of 6th grade year, 7th grade, and 8th grade, even though my parents were getting divorced, we still lived together under the same roof. And that was horrible. So I feel like at that point, my father was an amazing father growing up. But at that point, I feel like once my mom decided to finally walk away and get divorced from him, he emotionally withdrew from me and my brothers. And there was just this huge emotional disconnection, and it was toxic. And it was just all bad. He was frustrated. He gave up. I decided, I don't know. Jason and Jimmy, I feel like, had their own set of issues that, I don't know. Jason claims he wasn't affected, but I was deeply affected by it. Like, because I could feel the emotional disconnection with my father, and it made me stop caring about everything. I just rebelled really hard. I, just did my thing, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. Then we moved away from my father. We moved to a different suburb of Chicago. We grew up in Evanston, but I went to most of my high schooling in Buffalo Grove, Illinois. And it was just really, really hard. So I rebelled. I had a boyfriend all 4 years of high school, and I thought I was gonna marry him, and I was so in love. I felt like I was an adult, and I felt like I could make my own adult decisions and like all that stuff. But he is a huge part of the reason why I chose to turn my life over to the Lord. So that's why I mentioned him. At that point, he was my everything. And it was a very emotionally, and towards the end, it got physically abusive. When I was 16, my mom asked Jason and I if we wanted to be baptized. And I said yes. And we get to the church, and, they're singing, they're doing the worship, and then they're preaching. And this was at like a really little church that my mom was going to at the time. But I didn't go very often because I didn't really care for it that much. But I was like, okay, I'll get baptized. But then as they're singing and as the sermon is going on, I'm like, I can't do this. Like, what am I doing? So I remember I ended up getting up, and I went over to talk to my mom and her best friend Gwen. And I was like, Mom, I don't want to be baptized. I was like, I'm not going to change anything. Like, I have no intentions on walking out of here and doing anything different. I'm going to keep having sex with my boyfriend. I'm going to keep living life as I have been, and I don't have any intentions on changing anything. And she was like, she sat me down with Gwen. She was like, Shanna, this is just your way of accepting the Lord and asking the Lord to change you. You don't have to change anything. God will change you. And I was just like, okay. So I got baptized, and immediately I did feel different. That's when everything kind of started. Like, I think I ended up going back to life as normal, but things in me were shifting very slowly, but they were shifting. But it wasn't until after high school, when I moved out on my own, that the real change began. So fast forward through high school, I moved out on my own right out of high school. My mom moved to my grandmother's because my grandmother got sick. So my mom went to go take care of my grandparents, and they were about an hour away from me. And I worked full-time as a hairstylist right out of high school. So I was set. I felt grown. I wanted to move out for so long, so I felt free. I was doing my thing. I was working a full-time job. I was living the life. I had my group of friends that I was really tight with. We kicked it hard. We would hang out in the evening, and I would come home in the morning, and we would be up all night, and then I would go to work, no sleep. I was doing my thing. About 6 months into living on my own, I don't know, first of all, it was hard. I was making $10 an hour plus tips. I was building my clientele. So I wasn't making a ton of money. And at that point, I had a shopping problem because, I'm in Chicago. I always wore heels. I always dressed nice. I had to be on 10 all the time. I never left the house looking crazy, ever, because I'm in Chicago. Please, I've got to look good. We going to Walmart? Okay, hold on, let me put my heels on. That's how it was. But I was broke. And it was a struggle. I was so in and out of this relationship because he ended up cheating on me, and I just loved him so much. And, at that time, I was just so insecure, and I believed that I would never find someone to love me. We ended up kind of back and forth in our relationship. So after a while, it was so mentally and emotionally draining dealing with him because of the abuse that I just got to a point where I knew I needed something more. I knew that what I was doing is not working. I feel depressed all the time. I was empty. I was lonely. I was sad. I was the kind of person that always had to be around someone all the time. And I hung out with my friends all the time, but I was still so lonely. And I remember just getting to a point to where I was like, I called my mom and I was like, Mom, I don't know what to do. I can't do this anymore. And she was like, will you come to church with me? And I was like, yes. I finally got to a point where I was like, yes. At the time, she was going to Willow Creek Church in Barrington, Illinois. Those of you who are in the Chicago area have probably heard of Willow Creek. It is amazing. I think the pastor is Bill Hybels. I believe that is who it is. But it is the most incredible church. My mom had been trying to get me to go for years, and I just refused. I didn't want to. I didn't want anything to do with the church. And honestly, the reason why I didn't want anything to do with the church was because Christians are hypocrites. Like, that life, it didn't appeal to me. And honestly, I'm going to be honest, like, a lot of the reasons why I didn't want to become a Christian are things that I still hate about Christianity, or what people have made Christianity out to be. I didn't like the rules. I didn't like the restrictions. At the time I'm in this relationship and I'm having sex at a young age. I was like, I'm not going to stop having sex. So like, if giving my life to the Lord means that I can't have sex with my boyfriend anymore, then no thanks. That was my perspective. But at this point, after I graduated, I was just so desperate. So my mom would come twice a week. She would come on Saturday evening, and she lived, like I said, she lived an hour away. So I didn't have a car either at the time. She would come and drive an hour to pick me up for Saturday evening service, which was awesome. It was called Axis, and it was for 20s, 20-somethings. It was for that age group, and I loved it. I remember the first time I went, it really struck me because the song that they sang was Michelle Branch's Everything to Me. I literally just like sat there because I'd never been to a mega church. I always went to the Salvation Army church with my friend during high school, or any church that I would see. I was just so turned off by it. Like, you stand and you read these boring hymns out of this boring, I'm sorry, this is just how I really felt. And honestly, I'm not a fan of hymns myself, even to this day, because they're boring. They're boring. For me, they were boring. But especially at the time, I'm, in my teens, and I was just bored to tears. All these people just singing, and then you leave, and then they're this totally different person and just so hypocritical. But anyway, I go to Axis, and I remember the first time that we went, my mom went in there with me, and I'm just watching, and it's like a freaking concert. They're up there on stage with, the whole entire band and vocals and lights and all this stuff, and they're singing Michelle Branch's Everything to Me, and I'm like, wow, like, this is church? So I walked away just transformed. I'm like, if this is church, then I can do this. Like, I can do this. Because to me, music is so important. I love music. I don't listen to it very much anymore. I'm really careful about what I feed my mind. But music was so, especially at the time, so important to me. And I was just blown away. I'm like, I can do this. She asked me if I wanted to join a small group. So then it turned into, from Saturday evening, she would come and pick me up and take me to church, to Saturday evenings, and Tuesday evening she would come, drive an hour and pick me up. So twice a week, my mom would come drive an hour to pick me up and to take me to church, drop me off, and go all the way an hour home. She was willing to make that sacrifice for me so that I could be exposed to God in that way. And that was transforming for me. It was transforming. I remember, like, immediately my mind started shifting. I loved it. I could not wait to go on Saturdays. I could not wait to go on Tuesdays. I loved it. So we would go every single week, twice a week, and she would never push it on me. She would never force anything on me. She let me ask questions, and she was just there for me. It was never like she never force-fed me anything. And if I ever had any questions about decisions I had to make or anything, she would just give me her advice, and she would be like, but Shanna, don't take my word for it. Take the Lord's word for it. Take it to the Lord. Ask him to reveal to you the truth. You know, at the time, I think she probably gave a little bit more guidance because I was so new. But her being there for me in that way was transforming. As time went on, my mind started shifting. I started to kind of withdraw from my friends because none of them knew the Lord. Everybody kind of was like, what are you doing? Like, really? Why are you going to church so much? And like, what's wrong with you? Because they weren't used to this from me. And I remember my boyfriend that I was back and forth with at the time, he was kind of sort of living with me. Like, he was off and on living with me. And it was an issue because at that point, I decided I wanted to wait till marriage to have sex. And he did not like it. He was not happy. And it was always an argument. That's what I wanted. Like, I wanted to wait. I think part of me also just wanted the relationship to end, but I didn't feel like I could do it. I didn't feel like I could get away from him. I didn't feel like I could do life without him. Not because he made me better, but because I didn't know how to be without him at that point. I spent the last 4 years in a relationship with him. I mean, I thought I was going to marry him, and I didn't know how to be without him. Fast forward, my grandmother passed away in 2001 in August. And I remember after she passed away, I mean, my grandmother was the matriarch of our family, and it was devastating. Oh my gosh, like, I freaking loved my grandmother, and she was just the best. So it was really hard. It was really hard after that, I think, for everybody. I think everybody kind of felt lost. Like, oh my gosh, like, what are we going to do? But my mom and my grandfather had discussed, because my grandfather is from Ellettsville, Indiana, which is outside of Bloomington, Indiana. And my mom wanted to honor his wishes, and he wanted to move back to Indiana to spend more time with his family. And my mom, like I said, wanted to honor his wishes, and her dream was to live in the country. So she was like, let's do this. So she decided to sacrifice everything, to sacrifice her entire life, and move to Bloomington, Indiana for my grandfather. So I remember my mom called me and we talked about it, and I was just, I was like, no, oh God, no, I need you. But she kind of pitched it like, this could be your fresh start. Like, this could be a clean slate. It could be a clean slate for the whole family. And that was really appealing to me because I felt trapped in my relationship. I knew that moving away was probably the only way that I was going to get away from him. So I decided that I was gonna think about it. So we ended up taking a couple trips to go visit. And long story short, I decided to move to Indiana with my mom and my grandfather. And then Jason ended up coming also. Jimmy was gonna come, but he's an actor and there's no jobs in Indiana really. I mean, there's nothing great in terms of acting in Indiana. So Chicago was a better choice for him to stay for that. So I decided that I was going to go. I told my boss, just because I wanted her to know what I was doing, which turned out to be a big mistake. I told her that it would be better for me financially to move, and I didn't want to be far away from my family. And my boss ended up proposing something to me to keep me at the salon. She offered me a room in her house and a car for cheaper than I was paying in my apartment, and I didn't even have a car. And she offered all of that to me if I stay and work at the salon, which was so amazing. They're willing to offer a room in their house and a car? Are you serious? So that was a hard decision for me, but I knew that I had to go. I knew that I had to go. At that point, I didn't know how to hear God's voice clearly. So I just knew that I didn't want to be away from my mom because my mom was my rock. My mom was crucial in this new life with the Lord. She was crucial, and I knew that I could not do this without her. I also knew that I needed to get away from my ex. So after I told my boss that I wasn't going to take her proposal and that I really needed to be with my family, she basically fired me. She said it didn't make sense to invest in me when I'm only going to be leaving anyway. So instead of just leaving me on at the $10 an hour, she was like, but I'll help you find another job. I was like, really? So she fired me. So I was out of a job for, it was 6 more months. So at the time, my boyfriend, he kind of was sort of living with me. He helped me out with the bills, and he paid for a lot of things. Like, he was very helpful, but he was very controlling. There was one evening where he cheated on me with so many women. Oh my gosh. We were kind of sort of trying again. He wanted me to stay. He didn't want me to move. And I was still kind of like, I don't know. I was so back and forth between whether I wanted to go and whether I didn't want to go. But I lost my job, so now what am I gonna do? Like, I have to go. But he was trying to get me to stay. He's like, I really want us to do this. I love you. And is there anything that I need to know before we start fresh? I did date this other guy and I did sleep with him, but I was like, that's none of his business. Like, he doesn't need to know what I did while he was out, you know, sleeping around with all these women. Like, that's none of your business. So I said, no, there's nothing you need to know. And so we were like, okay, let's start fresh in this relationship and we're going to grow from here. He always felt like my relationship with the Lord, his mom even said, a relationship with God is like a new car. It's all exciting at first, but then you just get used to it and it's just there. And I was just like, you know, so they thought that I wasn't going to stick out my relationship with the Lord. They thought it was just a phase. So the next day after we decided to start fresh, clean slate, you know, and try again and do this right, whatever, he calls me at work the next evening and he was like, this is back when there were no cell phones. He was like, Shanna, I just got tested and they said I have chlamydia. I get tested every few months, so I know it's not from me. Is there something you need to tell me? And I'm just like, oh my God, like, I hadn't been with that many people. So I ended up falling for it. And I was like, yes. I ended up sleeping with this guy that I met and we were dating for a while and blah, 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 blah. And he was pissed. Which, what nerve? You've been sleeping around with how many women? And you mad at me for sleeping with one dude? Like, get out of here. But whatever, I was young and dumb. I was like, no. And I used to, oh God, this is so stupid. I used to beg and like, no, don't leave me. No. Oh my God, I was so insecure. And he was like, we'll just talk about it later. He ends up picking me up from work. I literally live right behind my job at the time. So my salon was here, and then there was a fence, and then my apartment complex was here. So all I had to do was like cross the fence and I'm home. But he ended up picking me up, and he was so drunk. And he was an alcoholic for sure. He was so drunk. And we ended up, he drove me home, and we were like sitting in the parking lot, and he just looks, I mean, he's glazed over, and he's like, just not really talking much, and I'm, you know, an over-explainer, so I'm like explaining everything, and I just didn't think it was any of your business because you were out doing whatever you wanted to do, and you cheated on me with so many women that, like, I didn't feel like what we did when we weren't together was any of your business, and blah, 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 and I'm like, I'm turned with my back against the dashboard, and he's just sitting there like drinking Bacardi out of the bottle like water. And he just like winds up and punches me full force in my chest. That was the first time he ever hit me. I mean, he knocked the wind out of me. I was like, did that just happen? I think I was so shocked. Like, I was already crying, but I think that I was so shocked that he literally, like, you just punched me. What? So I remember I was so dumb, and I didn't want him to leave. I didn't want him to leave me. And so my dumb self invited him up, and I was like, let's just talk about it inside and whatever. So we go inside and arguing top of our lungs. It's like, you know, it's so late. And I mean, we're literally arguing at the top of our lungs. And he like takes me by the neck, pushes me against the wall. He says to me, if I had a knife, this is exactly how I would kill you. And then he showed me how he would kill me. Then he proceeded to sit on the bed, drinking his Bacardi like water. And in that moment was the first time, it was almost like an outer body experience. It was the first time that I actually saw Satan in his eyes. I had never experienced anything like that before, but I remember so vividly looking into his eyes and I saw Satan. And I had never seen that in him before. That was kind of like a spiritual wake-up call for me. That was my first encounter, really, with Satan face to face, it felt like. So at that moment, I knew, like, that's it. Like, I have to do it. I have to move. So after that night, I think that I was so afraid. One, I had never been hit before, so I think I was just kind of blown away, and he apologized, and I let him back in. I loved him, and I believed that he was sorry, and I chose to forgive him, and I wanted us to be together, and so I forgave him, and we stayed in our relationship. My mom was not happy about it, but we stayed in our relationship, and I kind of had to keep it a little bit of a secret from her. But I still decided to move. I still told my mom that I would move. So that whole evening with him hitting me was just the line drawn in the sand for me. Like, that was it. That was it. And then we moved to Indiana. And from there on, I mean, that was it. I feel like I went from always having to be around somebody, always having to be hanging out with somebody, to not having anybody to hang out with and not having anyone to be around. I always say that Bloomington, for me, was like an incubator. It was kind of like that holding space for me to grow and develop, because I was forced to do all of the things that I naturally didn't do. Like, I never went to the store by myself when I lived in Chicago because of the hoots and the hollers and, hey girl, hey red bone, hey red bone. You know, I hated the attention. So I never went anywhere by myself because I didn't want to be in the position to be hollered at or to feel uncomfortable walking down the street in Chicago by myself. So moving to Bloomington, I was forced to do everything by myself. I mean, me and my mom hung out a lot, but I was forced to go to church by myself. You know, my mom didn't always go, but it was good for me. Like, she went with me sometimes, but I went to church every single weekend by myself. And I would even visit other churches. I would drive to Indy and go to churches, and I did everything alone. And then I went through this whole experience of learning how to hear God's voice and living in Bloomington and being secluded. It was almost as if I was just alone with the Lord. And I was like, okay, like, what do you want to do with me? Like, what do you want to do with me? I'm here. I'm in this new place. I shed my past completely. Like, I'm starting completely fresh. Do what you want with me, Lord. I am willing. And that's the place that I was in. And I went through a lot of stuff over the years, but all of the things that I went through in my years after I moved out of Chicago, that's when I really learned who God was, and I really learned how to hear God's voice, and it was life-changing. So I guess that's it. That's my testimony. That is what drew me to the Lord. If it wasn't for my mother, I would not be who I am. I give her the credit 100%. She is the biggest reason why I am who I am today. And for her, I am forever grateful. I'm gonna cry. So that's my story. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Give this video a thumbs up, comment, share, subscribe, and help me to continue growing my family.